Blood pooled on the sterile hospital floor, but it wasn't human. A desperate Navy SEAL cradled his dying K9, screaming for help as administrators ordered them out. One nurse crossed the line to save a hero, costing her everything, until the United States military decided to return the favor. The fluorescent lights of Coastal General Hospital flickered with an irritating hum, casting a pale, sickly glow over the emergency room. Abigail Harrison adjusted her scrubs, her eyes scanning the telemetry monitors at the Central Nurses Station. As the charge nurse of the busiest trauma center in downtown San Diego, Abigail was no stranger to the gruesome and the tragic. Gunshot wounds, horrific multi-vehicle pileups, and industrial accidents were the standard currency of her 12-hour night shifts. But nothing in her 15 years of emergency medicine could have prepared her for the chaos that was about to shatter the glass doors of her ER. It started with the screech of tires. Outside the ambulance bay, a matte black tactical SUV slammed onto the concrete, hopping the curb and nearly taking out a row of wheelchairs. Before the vehicle had even fully stopped, the rear doors kicked open. A man in military fatigues, his face smeared with grease, and sweat sprinted toward the entrance. He wasn't carrying a civilian casualty. In his heavily tattooed arms, he cradled a massive 70-pound Belgian Malinois. The dog's coat, usually a sleek mahogany, and black, was matted with thick, dark blood. "I need help! Somebody get a gurney!" The man roared, his voice cracking with a raw, guttural panic that silenced the entire waiting room. Abigail instinctively stepped out from behind the desk. As she closed the distance, the metallic scent of fresh blood hit her. The man's name tape read, Hayes, Petty Officer First Class, Wyatt Hayes, and the dog, clad in a specialized tactical harness bearing the insignia of a Naval Special Warfare Development Group, was bleeding out from a massive laceration across its chest and neck. "Sir, what happened?" Abigail asked, signaling for an orderly to bring a crash cart. "Dockside drill. An explosive charge detonated early. He took the shrapnel meant for my squad." Wyatt gasped, dropping to his knees as the dog's head lolled back. The K9's breathing was a wet, ragged wheeze. "His name is Titan. He's an active duty operator. Please, you have to help him." Before Abigail could speak, a sharp, authoritative voice sliced through the tension. "Absolutely not! Get that animal out of my hospital immediately." Dr. Gregory Mercer, the chief hospital administrator, strode into the trauma bay. Mercer was a man who worshipped liability protocols more than human or animal life. Dressed in a tailored three-piece suit that cost more than Abigail's monthly salary, he looked down at the bleeding dog with utter disgust. "Dr. Mercer, he's bleeding out from an arterial lac." Abigail countered her medical instincts, overriding the rigid hospital hierarchy. "He won't make it to the veterinary clinic on base." "I do not care, Nurse Harrison," Mercer snapped, pointing a manicured finger toward the exit. "This is a civilian human medical facility. We are not a pound. The bacterial risk, the insurance liability, the utter violation of health codes. If you do not remove this dog right now, I will have hospital security arrest you both for trespassing." Wyatt stood up, his towering frame casting a shadow over the administrator. "He is an American soldier, you bureaucratic coward. He saved 3 men tonight." "He is a dog," Mercer sneered coldly. "Security, escort this man off the premises." 2 burly security guards began to step forward, hands resting on their utility belts. Wyatt tensed his fists, clenching, preparing to fight his way through the room to save his partner. The standoff was a powder keg, and the fuse was burning down to nothing. Abigail looked at the dog. Titan's amber eyes rolled toward her, clouded with pain and shock. He let out a low, heartbreaking whimper, blood bubbling at the edge of his snout. He was dying, right there on her linoleum floor. To hell with the protocol, she thought. Wyatt, pick him up. Abigail ordered, her voice a whip crack that stunned the room. Trauma room 3, now. Harrison, I am ordering you to stand down. Mercer bellowed, his face flushing crimson. Abigail ignored him. She grabbed the handles of a nearby supply cart and shoved it toward the trauma suite. Wyatt didn't hesitate. He scooped Titan into his arms and bolted past the administrator, shouldering his way into the sterile surgical room. As soon as Wyatt was inside, Abigail stepped through the threshold, looked Mercer dead in the eye, and slammed the heavy double doors. She threw the deadbolt, locking the chief administrator out. Open this door! You are fired! You hear me? Harrison, your career is over! Mercer screamed, his fists pounding furiously against the reinforced glass. Inside the room, the noise faded into a dull thudding. Abigail tuned it out entirely. She snapped on a pair of sterile surgical gloves and pulled a surgical spotlight down over the steel table. Put him down. Keep pressure on his neck, Abigail instructed. Wyatt pressed his hands against the dog's throat, blood seeping through his fingers. Abigail worked with a manic, practiced precision. She wasn't a veterinarian, but mammalian anatomy in a trauma setting followed the same desperate rules. Stop the bleeding, restore the volume, close the gap. She quickly flushed the wound with copious amounts of saline, revealing a jagged piece of steel shrapnel lodged dangerously close to the carotid artery. I have to pull it and clamp the bleeder, Abigail said, locking eyes with the SEAL. Hold him steady. If he thrashes, he dies. Wyatt leaned his entire body weight over the dog, whispering a steady stream of soothing commands in a foreign language. German or Dutch, Abigail couldn't tell. With a pair of surgical forceps, Abigail gripped the shrapnel. She took a breath, clamped her jaw, and pulled. Blood geysered upward, splashing across her scrubs and face mask. She didn't blink. Plunging her gloved fingers directly into the wound cavity, she blindly felt for the pulsing torn artery. Got it. She clamped the hemostat down hard. The spray stopped. Volume, she muttered to herself, grabbing a massive bag of lactated Ringer's solution. Since she couldn't risk a blood transfusion without knowing canine compatibility, massive fluid resuscitation was their only hope to keep Titan's blood pressure from fatally crashing. She managed to find a vein in the dog's front leg, inserting a large-bore IV catheter and opening the fluids wide. For the next 45 minutes, Trauma Room 3 became a bubble, isolated from the world. Outside, Mercer had called the local police. Red and blue lights were already flashing through the high emergency room windows. But inside, under the blinding surgical lights, Abigail meticulously sutured the muscle tissue and skin of the military working dog, tying off the bleeders with the skill of a veteran combat surgeon. Finally, as she snipped the last suture, she stepped back. Titan's chest rose and fell in a steady rhythmic pattern. The cardiac monitor they had rigged to his paws showed a stable, strong heartbeat. Wyatt slumped against the wall, sliding down to the floor as the adrenaline left his system. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, tearless relief. Abigail peeled off her bloody gloves, tossing them into the biohazard bin. She looked at the locked door. Through the glass, she saw Mercer flanked by 2 San Diego police officers. Her career was over. The realization crashed over her like a freezing wave. She had broken federal health codes, violated hospital policy, and locked out the chief administrator. She was going to lose her pension, her job, and likely her nursing license. Wyatt stood up. He unvelcroed a black and gold trident patch from his shoulder sleeve. He walked over to Abigail and pressed it into her hand, closing her fingers over it. "I know what you just sacrificed," Wyatt said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved a brother today. We don't forget. Ever." Abigail offered a sad, exhausted smile. "Take care of him, Wyatt." She turned around, unlocked the deadbolt, and pushed the doors open to face the firing squad. The moment the seal of Trauma Room 3 was broken, Dr. Gregory Mercer lunged forward, flanked by the two police officers. His face was a mask of unadulterated venom. "Arrest her! Arrest this lunatic!" Mercer shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Abigail's blood-soaked scrubs. "Officers, nobody is getting arrested," a booming voice interrupted. Down the hallway, a team of 6 heavily armed military police officers, accompanied by a naval veterinarian in field scrubs, marched into the ER. The sheer presence of the Federal Tactical Unit caused the local cops to step back. The military vet brushed past Mercer without a word, entering the trauma room. He quickly assessed Titan's sutured neck, checked the IV lines, and let out a low whistle. He looked back at Abigail, nodding with professional respect. "Clean work. You saved his life. We've got him from here." The MPs loaded the massive Malinois onto a specialized military transport gurney. Wyatt walked alongside the dog, shooting one final lingering look at Abigail before disappearing out the sliding doors. With the military gone, Mercer regained his tyrannical composure. The local police declined to arrest Abigail, citing a lack of criminal intent, but they couldn't protect her from the administrative slaughter that followed. "My office, now!" Mercer hissed. 10 minutes later, Abigail sat in the cold leather chair of the chief administrator's suite. Her union representative, whom she had frantically tried to page, had been barred from the building by Mercer's direct orders. "You have single-handedly exposed this hospital to millions of dollars in liability." Mercer paced behind his mahogany desk. "You brought an unvetted, potentially diseased animal into a sterile human trauma bay. You locked out superior staff. You misappropriated thousands of dollars in medical supplies. I saved the life of a bomb-sniffing dog who took shrapnel for American soldiers," Abigail said quietly, her exhaustion replacing her fear. "I'd do it again." "Of course you would," Mercer sneered, stopping to look at her with utter contempt. "Because you are unstable. You are dangerous, and as of this exact second, you are terminated with cause." He slid a pink sheet of paper across the desk. A formal notice of termination. "But I'm not stopping there, Harrison," Mercer continued, leaning in close. "I am submitting a formal report to the State Nursing Board. I am flagging you for severe psychological instability and professional endangerment. Your license will be suspended by morning. You will never practice medicine in the state of California or anywhere else in this country ever again." Abigail felt the air leave her lungs. Firing her was one thing. Revoking her license, destroying her entire life's work, was an execution. "You can't do that. You know I'm not unstable," she whispered. "I can do whatever I want." Mercer smiled, a thin, cruel line. "Security will escort you to your locker. You have 5 minutes to vacate the premises before I have you arrested for criminal trespassing." The walk of shame was agonizing. 2 security guards flanked Abigail as she emptied her locker. She packed 15 years of memories, thank you cards from patients, her customized stethoscope, a framed photo of her late father, into a single cardboard box. Whispers echoed through the hallways as she was marched toward the exit. The staff she had mentored and worked alongside for over a decade looked away, terrified of catching Mercer's wrath. When the hospital's glass doors slid shut behind her, the heavy California rain had begun to fall. Abigail stood in the wet parking lot, holding her cardboard box completely hollowed out. By the next morning, the nightmare escalated. Abigail woke up on her small living room couch to the sound of her phone exploding with notifications. She groggily turned on the local news. Mercer had not wasted time. Fearing that the military angle might paint the hospital in a bad light, he had proactively hired a crisis PR firm. The headline on the morning broadcast read, "Local nurse fired after psychotic break brings stray dog into ER." A perfectly groomed news anchor read the statement issued by Coastal General Hospital. Last night, an unstable employee forcefully barricaded herself in a sterile trauma suite with a violent animal compromising the safety of dozens of human patients. The hospital took immediate decisive action to terminate the employee and protect our community. Abigail dropped her phone. The narrative was completely spun. There was no mention of the Navy SEALs, no mention of the heroism, no mention of Titan. Just a crazy nurse and a stray dog. Her phone rang. It was her landlord. "Abigail, I saw the news. My phone has been ringing off the hook from reporters. I can't have this kind of circus at my property. You're on a month-to-month lease. I need you out by the end of the week." Within 24 hours, Abigail had lost her job, her medical license, her reputation, and now her home. She sat on the floor of her apartment, pulling her knees to her chest, and finally allowed herself to cry. The system had crushed her without breaking a sweat. Dr. Mercer had won, or so he thought. 30 miles away, across the Coronado Bridge, the sun was rising over the heavily fortified naval amphibious base. Deep inside a restricted briefing room, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell Brody stood at the head of a tactical table. Brody was a man carved from granite, a 20-year veteran of naval special warfare. Sitting at the table was Wyatt Hayes, his arm wrapped in a fresh bandage, his eyes burning with exhaustion and anger. "Titan's going to make it," Commander Wyatt reported, his voice tight. "The base surgeon said if that nurse hadn't clamped the artery when she did, he would have been dead before the transport arrived." Brody nodded slowly, tapping a pen against the classified mission file. "Good. Titan's a good operator. Have you sent flowers to the hospital staff to thank the nurse?" Wyatt's jaw tightened. He pulled out a crumpled printout of the morning news article and slid it across the table. "They fired her, sir," Wyatt said, his voice dropping to a dangerous icy register. "The hospital administrator, a guy named Mercer. He had security throw her out in the rain. He suspended her license. The news is calling her crazy and saying Titan was a rabid stray. They're trying to destroy her to cover their own asses." Commander Brody picked up the paper. He read the article in silence. The room grew deathly quiet. Among the SEAL teams, loyalty was a religion. If you bled for them, they bled for you. A civilian had risked her entire livelihood to save one of their own, and a bureaucratic suit in a glass tower was attempting to bury her for it. Brody slowly lowered the paper. He looked at Wyatt and then at the 4 other heavily armed operators sitting around the table. "Gentlemen," Commander Brody said, a terrifying calmness in his voice. "It appears Coastal General Hospital has a severe misunderstanding of who exactly they are dealing with." Brody picked up a secure red phone from the center of the table. "Get me the Judge Advocate General and fuel up the transport trucks. We are going to pay Dr. Mercer a visit." The midday sun was baking the asphalt of the Coastal General Hospital parking lot when the rhythmic, heavy thumping of helicopter rotors shattered the suburban quiet. Dr. Gregory Mercer was standing at his panoramic office window, sipping an espresso and admiring the pristine view of the coastline, thoroughly satisfied with his damage control. the troublesome nurse, was gone. The hospital board of directors had praised his swift action in terminating her. The local media was completely eating out of the palm of his hand, broadcasting his meticulously crafted narrative. His smug reflection in the reinforced glass was suddenly interrupted by a massive olive drab shadow. A Sikorsky UH-60. Black Hawk helicopter descended with aggressive speed, its powerful downdraft whipping the manicured palm trees into a violent frenzy. It didn't land on the designated rooftop hospital helipad. Instead, it hovered inches above the restricted executive parking lot, blowing the windshield out of Mercer's personal luxury sedan. At the exact same moment, 3 heavily armored tactical troop transports smashed through the security gates of the main entrance, screeching to a halt in a perfectly coordinated blockade that completely sealed off the building. What in God's name is happening? Mercer spilled his espresso, lunging for his desk phone. Security, I need all security personnel at the front doors right now. Lock down the facility. Downstairs, the hospital lobby was a scene of unparalleled shock and awe. Heavily armed Navy SEALs clad in full tactical gear poured out of the transports. They didn't shout, they didn't point their weapons at the terrified civilians, but their sheer silent, overwhelming presence parted the sea of patients and doctors like Moses at the Red Sea. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell Brody led the wedge formation, his boots striking the polished hospital tiles with deliberate, terrifying, heavy thuds. Flanking him was Wyatt Hayes, completely out of his combat fatigues and dressed in sharp pressed service dress blues, a stark visual contrast that signaled this was official federal business. 2 hospital security guards, the very same men who had unceremoniously escorted Abigail out into the rain the night before, stepped forward, their hands nervously hovering near their radios. "Hold it right there," the head guard stammered, stepping into Brody's path, his voice trembling. "You cannot just barge in here. This is private property. You need to leave." Brody didn't even break stride. He handed the terrified guard a thick embossed folder bearing the golden seal of the United States Department of Defense. "Federal jurisdiction, son. Step aside immediately or be formally charged with obstructing a military investigation." The guard looked at the seal, went deathly pale, and instantly flattened himself against the wall, dropping his radio to the floor. Upstairs, Mercer was frantically dialing the chief of police when the solid oak doors of his executive suite were violently kicked open. The heavy wood splintered right off the reinforced hinges, crashing into a row of metal filing cabinets and sending paperwork flying everywhere. Mercer dropped the phone, his face draining of all color. "You cannot enter my office. I will have you court-martialed. I am personal friends with the governor. I demand you leave this instant." Commander Brody walked slowly up to Mercer's desk, placing his large, calloused hands flat on the polished mahogany. He leaned in his eyes, cold, calculating, and completely unyielding. "Dr. Gregory Mercer." Brody's voice was dangerously quiet, slicing through the tension in the room. "You have made a grave tactical error. I fired a rogue, unstable employee who blatantly violated hospital protocol." Mercer squeaked desperately, trying to regain his authoritarian posture. "She brought a stray bleeding animal into a sterile environment. I protected this hospital. I protected the patients." Wyatt stepped forward, pulling a highly classified document from his jacket pocket and throwing it onto the desk. "That so-called stray animal is a highly decorated naval special warfare operator with a top-secret security clearance. You intentionally denied federal personnel emergency medical aid, resulting in life-threatening delays. Furthermore, by initiating a defamatory press campaign this morning, You knowingly broadcasted classified operational details involving active military assets. Mercer blinked rapidly, his arrogance finally faltering as the reality of the situation set in. Classified. It was just a dog. You cannot be serious. He is United States federal property, Brody corrected sharply, slamming his fist onto the desk. And right now, the Judge Advocate General has authorized the immediate seizure of all your communication record security footage and internal emails to determine if your gross negligence constitutes treasonous sabotage. Before Mercer could utter another word, a team of military intelligence technicians pushed past Brody, immediately ripping the hard drives from Mercer's expensive computer and aggressively stuffing his physical files into transparent evidence bags. "You are ruining my hospital!" Mercer shrieked helplessly, watching his entire pristine kingdom dismantled in seconds by the federal operators. "No," Brody said, straightening his posture and looking down at the broken administrator. "You ruined a hero's life to cover up your own pathetic cowardice. Now the United States Navy is simply returning the favor." The knock on Abigail Harrison's apartment door was sharp, heavy, and extremely authoritative. She was sitting on the cold floor, surrounded by half-packed cardboard boxes, numbly staring at a blank wall. She hadn't eaten anything in 2 days. Her nursing license had been officially suspended that very morning, pending a state medical board review. Her career, her passion, and her entire livelihood were completely over. She dragged herself to the door and pulled it open, fully expecting her angry landlord demanding the keys and ordering her to vacate the premises immediately. Instead, Wyatt Hayes stood in the dim hallway, looking imposing and incredibly handsome in his formal dress blues. Directly behind him stood the towering figure of Lieutenant Commander Brody. "Abigail Harrison," Wyatt said gently, the hard, lethal edge of his military persona completely melting away into profound gratitude. "We need you to come with us right now." "Wyatt," Abigail breathed out absolute confusion, washing over her exhausted, tear-stained face. "What are you doing here? If anyone sees you talking to me, the hospital administration will just spin it again. They will destroy you too. Let them try." Brody interrupted, stepping forward and offering a warm, deeply respectful smile. "Ma'am, on behalf of the United States Navy, I am here to formally apologize for the extreme distress you've endured over the last 48 hours. And we are here to finally fix it." 30 minutes later, a heavily armored SUV pulled up to the main entrance of Coastal General Hospital. But the scene was entirely different from the quiet, tragic morning of her dismissal. The parking lot was absolutely swarming with local and national news vans, eager reporters, and massive satellite trucks. A makeshift wooden podium had been erected right in front of the hospital doors, flanked perfectly by a solemn color guard of Navy SEALs, holding the American flag. When Abigail nervously stepped out of the tactical vehicle, the camera flashbulbs erupted in a blinding strobe effect. Wyatt walked closely by her side, guiding her safely through the chaotic, shouting crowd of journalists. Standing tall at the podium was the Surgeon General of the United States Navy, a distinguished gray-haired admiral who had flown in directly from the Pentagon just for this unprecedented event. Next to him, tightly handcuffed and looking thoroughly defeated, stood Dr. Gregory Mercer, physically flanked by 2 unsmiling federal marshals. The powerful admiral tapped the microphone. The aggressive press corps instantly fell dead silent. Yesterday morning, a false narrative was maliciously spun by a coward to protect his own financial liability. The admiral's voice boomed over the large speakers, echoing across the hospital grounds. He publicly claimed a deranged nurse endangered this medical facility by bringing in a violent stray dog. That was an absolute unforgivable lie. The dog in question was military working dog Titan, a decorated combat hero who bravely took an explosive shrapnel blast shielding American soldiers during a highly classified covert training operation. Denied legal entry by Dr. Mercer, Titan would have tragically died on the street. Nurse Abigail Harrison bravely chose to disregard bureaucratic cowardice and honor the highest, most noble calling of the medical profession, saving a life. The massive crowd erupted in shocked murmurs and frantic note-taking. The television cameras rapidly panned over to Abigail, who stood frozen in pure, overwhelming disbelief. This morning, the Admiral continued, his voice echoing with absolute authority. The Department of Defense formally intervened. Dr. Gregory Mercer has been officially arrested by federal authorities for intentional obstruction of a military operation, reckless endangerment of military personnel, and blatant witness tampering. His tenure as Chief Hospital Administrator is permanently, irrevocably terminated. The crowd watched in stunned, breathless silence as a completely humiliated Mercer was aggressively led away to a waiting federal vehicle, his face buried deeply in his chest, his expensive designer suit heavily wrinkled and entirely ruined. Furthermore, the Admiral turned his gaze toward Abigail, smiling warmly for the first time. The California State Nursing Board, upon urgently reviewing the unedited security footage legally seized by our federal investigators, has completely reinstated Nurse Harrison's medical license, entirely clearing her of all alleged professional misconduct. Tears finally broke through Abigail's tired eyes. Wyatt gently handed her a clean handkerchief, smiling down at her. "But we aren't completely done yet," the Admiral said, stepping aside as a familiar, beautiful silhouette happily emerged from the hospital sliding doors. Led gently by his military handler, MWD Titan proudly walked out into the California sunshine. He moved a bit slowly, a thick, pristine white medical bandage wrapped securely around his muscular neck, but his head was held incredibly high. As soon as his bright amber eyes locked onto Abigail in the crowd, his heavy tail began to thump wildly against the concrete pavement. He forcefully pulled against his tactical leash, trotting directly over to her and aggressively pressing his massive, warm head directly against her hip. Abigail immediately dropped to her knees right there on the pavement, burying her face deeply into the dog's soft neck, sobbing freely and happily. The television cameras beautifully captured every single second of the reunion, a raw, undeniable, deeply moving testament to the incredible bond forcefully forged in the bloody chaos of Trauma Room 3. Commander Brody slowly walked over, deliberately crouching down beside her on the asphalt. Abigail, the United States Navy absolutely never lets its own people go unsupported. The prestigious position of Chief Civilian Medical Instructor for Tactical Combat Casualty Care at our Coronado base is currently vacant. It legally pays double what this civilian hospital ever gave you, and you report only directly to us. The job is entirely yours if you want it. Abigail looked up at the fierce, loyal Navy SEALs completely surrounding her, the dedicated federal agents who had ruthlessly torn down a powerful tyrant to protect her honor, and the beautiful, incredibly brave dog whose precious life she had miraculously saved. She wiped her happy tears, her spine proudly straightening with a profound, unbreakable, newfound strength. "When do I start?" she asked, her voice steady and confident. Wyatt grinned wildly affectionately, petting Titan's head. Pack your tactical gear, Nurse Harrison. We deploy tomorrow morning. What an incredible journey of sacrifice, loyalty, and ultimate justice. Abigail risked everything to save a true American hero. And the Navy SEALs proved they never leave anyone behind. If this heart-pounding true story of military brotherhood and taking down corrupt bureaucrats inspired you, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more amazing real-life stories. Drop a comment below to honor brave nurses and our military K9 heroes. Thank you.